And greetings, specheads. Welcome back to the Speculative Bookshelf. Today's episode is about 50% performance art, 50% writing craft, and 100% legend. We're going to dive into Harlan Ellison's Window-Writing Stunts, where he would set up a typewriter on a desk in front of a bookstore window, and he would go to work typing out a story with spectators outside peering in, and as he would finish a page, he would tape it to the window of the bookstore and everyone could read along as he progressed. We'll talk about how these stunts began, how often he did it, and what his hopes were for these stories. So grab your popcorn and stay tuned. Harlan Ellison started doing these writing stunts in public as a way of demystifying the act of writing, the art of writing, and to challenge the notion that it's just a secret activity where you sequester yourself in a corner and just either wait for the muse to strike or you wait for inspiration. He cried bullshit on all of this. He said, writing is work. You don't wait for the muse, you just sit down and do it. He was supposedly inspired by a claim that the writer George Simenon once wrote a full novel in a glass cage where he could be witnessed. Although that seems to be what was an urban legend at that time. But Harlan Ellison didn't find that out until years later. But anyways, it inspired his own window writing stunts. Now there seems to be no definitive timeline or even record of all the stories that he wrote in which years, because he started in the 70s. That's basically the general consensus. It's hard to pin down exactly when. And he went on he did this many times up till 1998. In fact, I've known for years about the legend of he wrote a complete story while set up in a bookstore window. And it was only recently when I found out he actually did this over 100 times. And as near as I can tell, his first public writing stunt was in 1973 at a science fiction convention. Although I've been unable to determine definitively which story this was. But as far as the bookstore window stunts, that can be traced back to, well, again, unsure, but either 76 or 1977 at the Santa Monica, California bookstore called A Change of Hobbit. He spent 5 days at the bookstore cranking out short stories. In fact, one day he cranked out 26 short stories, which became the A to Z of the chocolate alphabet, or from A to Z in the chocolate alphabet. And one of those stories he wrote during those 5 days, Strange Wine, went on to win 3 awards: a Hugo Award, an Edgar Award for short stories, naturally, and a British Fantasy Award. Several other stories from his window writing stunts also appeared in the book Strange Wine, and they all have kind of a horror bent to them, which Stephen King wrote about in his book Danse Macabre. Stephen King asserts that Strange Wine is one of the best horror fiction books written between 1950 and 1980. And in King's book Danse Macabre, he even reviews some of the stories in it. And then for over 20 more years, he continued with these book writing stunts, finally ending up in 1998, it seems. Like I said, no one is really sure. In Sherman Oaks, California, at the Dangerous Visions bookstore, he completed the story, Objects of Desire in the Mirror Are Closer Than They Appear. After the first few times of doing some of these stunts, of course, people were skeptical. They thought, He's just writing a story that he's already previously written or that he's already gotten plotted out. That was not so. These were completely original stories, and to prove it, after the first few times, whenever he did one of these stunts, he asked for a prompt or a Kickstarter from somebody in the bookstore who would give him a prompt, and then, or an opening line even. And he cranked out the story on that prompt or line. What's notable about these stories is that he was a two-finger typer. And he did all his typing on a manual Royal typewriter, Olympia Royal? And he typed, he claimed anyways, 120 words per minute with no mistakes. And not only that, all the stories he typed were complete in one draft. He never did any editing, he never did any rewriting. When they were eventually published in his book collections, some of them got minor tweaks where maybe a word or two would be changed just for clarification, or just very minor tweaks like that. But otherwise, the stories as they appear in the book were basically what he wrote during his bookstore stunt. I should also clarify that he didn't just simply sit down and bang out 5,000 words and that was it. No, I mean, it took time. He would take a lunch break, or he might need to look up something. He would get up and go find a book in the bookstore to look up some reference for something he needed in the story. Or he would even send one of the spectators, hey, go find a book for me about this. And or he would take a break and sign autographs for in people's books. But he always completed the story. It was always Ellison's desire to see all of his window writing stories compiled into one book in their original unedited state. However, it never happened in his lifetime. Charnel House did publish a book called Ellison Under Glass, which collected about 30 or so stories of his that he wrote in bookstore windows and at conventions and parties. But that did not come out until 2019, the year after Harlan Ellison died at the age of 84. However, Ellison did know about the book, and he was happy to know that it was coming out. In fact, he even had say-so. He had input into the design of the book. He wanted to have a photograph under glass on the front cover, for instance, and thus the name of the book is Ellison Under Glass. Well, not because of the picture under the glass, but because of him being behind glass during the writing of the stories. And that book is still available at the Subterranean Press website. It's an expensive book, $300 for the basic version, unnumbered, unsigned, whatever. I believe there was a numbered signed edition that went for like $3,000. I think it's been long sold out by now, but the standard version is still available. However, you don't have to spend $300 to find these stories, because I've done some work for you in compiling a list of all of his, not all of them, 30 or so stories I've been able to determine, and I've found out which of his books, which of his collections these stories were published in. So, and I've made a list in the description box below where you can find a list of the 30 or more stories that I found, and I've listed them under the titles of the books in which they were published. You will notice that some of the stories are published in more than one book. And that's because many times whenever Ellison was, or his publisher was putting out a new collection of Ellison stories, they often went back to previously published stories, but of books, from books that are no longer in print. And then it turned out that these books later were returned to print. But so anyways, you can find, like, one of the stories appears in like 4 different books. So anyways, I've left a link to Charnel House and to Subterranean Press if you're, where you can see the table of contents listing all the stories included in that edition. Plus I have a few more titles not in that book in my list below. So check that out. And if any of you out there know of any other stories and that he's done and which books they appear in, please, I beg you, leave a comment below. Let us all know what you found. So that wraps up the legend of Harlan Ellison and his window-writing stunts. I hope you enjoyed this look behind some of the stories behind this legend. And I hope you'll join me again next time on the Speculative Bookshelf. Until then, happy reading.